Hey everybody, David G, and I'm an alcoholic and an addict. By the grace of God, as he revealed himself to me through this work, as outlined in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been clean and sober since August 8th of 1994. I've been emotionally and sexually sober since October 1st of 2019. Really good to be here tonight. Praying everybody's having a happy holiday season. Ashley, thank you so much for your service. Dennis, you as well as always. And thank you everybody for coming out tonight. I say this often. It would be a good meeting with Dennis and Ashley. There's no doubt about it. But it'll be a very great meeting now since all of you are here. So I'm really, really happy that you're here. We've been journeying through the big book for about 21 weeks now, I think. We have made it over to the 8th step, and we're fixing to approach the 9th step tonight. This is an action step that I must do by myself. All these steps up to this point I've taken with the sponsor and with the guide. They've helped me, and now I'm going to get ready to take what I've learned and the conscious contact that I've come to have with this power greater than self. And I'm going to step out, and I'm going to begin to make amends and clean up the harms I've done, the damage out of my want to live on self-will and run the show myself. So I hear it all the time. I'll just make direct amends. I'll just do this and I'll do that. And if I'm still telling myself that, then obviously self is still the one who is guiding me through this process. I can remember not wanting to take the 3rd step for a long time. I didn't want to take the 3rd step because I wasn't sure of what God was going to have me do. It says, to build with me and do with me as you will. And I didn't want to do that. And I can remember my earlier sponsor asking me why. And I said, I don't know. He may want to send me to China or somewhere like that. And he said, I promise you that he loves the Chinese more than sending you over there to aggravate their lives. I promise. You're going to go somewhere, but where you're going to go out to the people that you've done damage to in the past. That's the only place you're going. And if you've damaged some in China, then you might be going there. But other than that, you're going to stay home and make amends. And I've never forgot that. That's always been the case. We've came through the first 8 steps in this process of the book. You'll hear it in meetings a lot that it's said this way. In steps 1, 2, 3, we get right with God. 4 through 7, we get right with ourselves, however you want to word it. 8 and 9, we get right with our brothers. And 10, we stay right with us. 11, we stay right with God. And then 12, I stay right with you. So I can't do any of that if I skip these directions or if I half-ass them or I come up with my ideas of how this thing ought to work. So once I had a list and I went back to my sponsor and we read through the list and we began to check off a lot of the names that wasn't harms. We looked at where I owed an apology, but there was no harm done. I felt guilt. There really wasn't any harm. There was just guilt. I needed to clean the air. We separated all that stuff out and we come up with a list. Now it's time for me to go make amends. And in the book, that's going to start at the bottom of page 76 tonight in the last paragraph, because by now we're ready to take this action. The sentence above, before we start into that last paragraph, says, remember. Remember, don't forget this. Whatever the book is saying, remember, don't forget here. It was agreed in the beginning that you would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol, lust, drugs, sex, whatever it may be that's giving you trouble. You agreed to that in the beginning of the process. Everybody I take through this process, that's the first thing we talk about from day one. Are you willing to go to any lengths to achieve recovery? And are you willing to do anything it takes to be relieved from the bondage of self? There's only 2 things I'm looking for here. One, of course, is to get free of whatever the addiction is. The other is to be released from the bondage of self. And I didn't know that for a long time. So bottom of page 76, we're going to pick up tonight here, and it says, probably there are some misgivings as we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt. Now, when we made a list in that 4th step, way back there, that was the list then, only we didn't know it, that most of these amends were going to come out of. When we did the conduct inventory and we took a look at whom we had hurt, a lot of people were going to come out of that conduct inventory that will go on this 8-step list. So as we look back over that list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, not just those we owe an apology or need to clear the air with, we're looking for harms. We're looking for the hurt. It says we may feel diffident, and that just means hesitant, And if I'm feeling that way, that's a feeling. That's coming from a source that we call self. I may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis, but let us be reassured, to some people, not all people, but to some people, we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on the first approach. And as I mentioned last night, I had to go and do more than one approach with a certain individual. I went about 3 times and ended up writing a letter to finish that amends off. The top of 77 says we might prejudice them, and we know that a prejudice is just an old idea. If someone comes to me that's harmed me pretty badly and they want to make amends to me, the first thing in my mind is going to be, what do they want? If I'm not spiritually fit and connected to this program, like a lot of us on here are. That's going to be my first idea. That's probably going to be theirs when I approach them. It says at the moment, you're not here after a while or not back there in the fourth in this. At the moment, we're trying to put our lives into order. And that's exactly what we're doing here. But this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose, and I heard people, we used to run around in AA in the early days saying this all the time. I just wish I knew what my purpose was. I pray for my purpose. I hope one day I'll find out my purpose. It tells me right here what it is. My real purpose is to fit myself, keyword, fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. If you will remember all the way back on page 20, if you'll hold your place right there and run all the way back to page 20. I was reading this with a brother today. It says, you may already ask yourself why it is some of us become so very ill for drinking. Doubtless you're curious to discover how and why in the face of expert opinion of the contrary, we've recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you are an alcoholic or an addict, whatever it may be, who wants to get over it, you may be already asking yourself, what do I have to do? Well, it's the purpose of the book to answer those questions. And back up a page where on page 19, it says this, first full paragraph, none of us make a sole vocation of this work, nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. We feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. The much more important demonstration lies before us in our respected homes, occupations, and affairs. So from the very beginning, we are beginning to get a look at what our real purpose is here. And once I fit myself to be of maximum service to God and to the people about me, that's going to include everybody, not just a few. And as we talked about last week, a good soldier is fit for duty. He don't know what his mission is going to be, but he's fit for that mission whenever that mission comes along. And that's the same thing we do here. I used to run around for a long time saying, my real purpose is to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And my first sponsor pulled me out of a meeting one time, or after the meeting was over, and he pulled me aside and he said, you're saying that wrong. Your real purpose is to fit yourself. I must be in fit condition if I'm going to be able to carry out my real purpose and be of maximum service to God and the people about us. It says it's seldom wise to an approach in an individual. It doesn't say nothing about avoiding him and living amends or any of that. It says approach. That means I'm going to see him. Who still smarts for him or injustice to him. Now, many of us will let fear override us there, and we don't really want to go make that amends. We'd rather send a letter or send a text or an email or do something like that and say that was God's will. Well, that's all BS. My book says we made direct amends to such people wherever possible. So it says and announce that we have gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. We're going to get knocked out. You lead with the chin, you're going to get knocked out. And it's the same way here. It's no different. Self will set me up on that deal. I'll take action on it without consulting with the sponsor or being deeply in the directions of this book, and it turns out worse than it ever could have. I made a few amends like that, I know. Why lay ourselves open to be branded fanatic or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message. But here's a great promise, and this is the direction. Our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire, not just a desire, but a sincere desire to set right the wrong, not just to go say, I'm sorry. Now, for a long time, I would tell you nowhere in this book does it say that you have to say that you're sorry or ask for forgiveness in amends. I was wrong in both places. But that is not the meat of this step. The meat of the step is to set right the wrong. If I have wronged you, I need to set this right, however that may be, however you may choose for that to be. Because whenever I come to you with this amends, the one thing that I'm going to tell you is I was wrong for what happened. And I need you to know that I know that I was wrong. And I need to ask you what I can do to make this right. Now, if you come up with some kind of crazy shit, go buy me a $10,000 car and we'll call it even. If I owed you $300, we're not going to do that. Or if you ask me to do something illegal, we're not going to do that. Outside of anything being illegal or immoral, I have to be willing to make this amends no matter what it is. I had a little uncle that, man, I'd taken advantage of this guy. I mean, I'd taken huge advantage of him. And he made me very angry. In my second marriage, I ended up in a divorce, and he ended up siding with her because she had the kids. And man, I wiped him out. I took a lot of stuff that was his. I'm sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, speaking at all these conferences, how God's working in my life, Big phonies, a lot of us. And so anyway, years later, he had tried to talk to me about it one time before. I threatened him with a beating, and it scared him, and he never came back. Well, after going through this work, he was one that was left on the amends that I never did make, and I knew I was going to have to make this amends. And so my mother had an 80th birthday party, and, he was there, and you could tell he was very nervous. And I went over and sat down and tried to talk with him, and, he didn't want much to do with me at all, and rightfully so. Well, he left, and I told him, hey, come by. I want to make this right. I want to make right what I've done. And he said, okay, I'll come by. And he never did. So a couple of months later, it's on my heart again because I'm in the middle of amends in this work. And so I pick up the phone and give him a call. He finds out who it is. He hangs up. Now, normally I'd just let that go. I'd say, okay, I've tried. It's water over the dam. I tried to make the amends. He wouldn't accept it, but something was on my heart. And I called him again. He's like, man, what do you want? Just what do you want? I mean, you got everything you wanted back then. And I said, man, I may have then, but I don't have it now. And what I need to do is make it right with you. And I know I left owing you a lot of money, and I don't have all that money on me today, but I have some. And if you'll come by and see me, I promise I want to make this right. And that's the only way I knew how to go about it at the time. That caught his attention. He said, well, I'll be in town tomorrow. I'll drop by. And so here I am. You know how we are. We're so afraid and nervous whenever the amends come around, and we're getting ready to make it. And here's this big, tough guy, just thinking, yeah, I'm going to thump him good, on this. But my spirit's telling me, you're not going to do any of that, dude. You're going to humble yourself, and you're going to do what you do here. So I talked with the sponsor, took the directions out of the book. The little guy showed up, little bitty guy. Now he's shrunk, he's in his 80s. For God's sakes, and in a pair of overalls, and he's nervous coming to my house. And so he comes in that day, and we sit down, and I make coffee, and we begin to talk. And I just tell him, I said, look, man, I need you to know that I was wrong, but more importantly, I need you to know that I was wrong. And I owe you a lot of money. And I don't have all that money today, but I've got a pretty good chunk. And if you will take this, I would like to make a deal with you to pay the rest of it back to you month by month, and we could set up a day. And he said, I would be willing to do that. And so we made that agreement. This was a lot of money. And month for month, I paid this man every time. He told me, if something comes up, you get in a bind. I was like, no, once we make the deal, dude, it's the deal. And so I remember making that with him, and he left there that day, and we're going to read about it here in a minute. But he left there that day, and there was a peace between us. We've never been real good, close buddies again like we was back then. We've never hung out and had dinner. We haven't went fishing again. We haven't done all that stuff together like we used to do. But when I see him in town now, there's a peace. It's okay. He knows he's safe. I know that it's okay. I don't have any of that hatred anymore toward him. And man, what a beautiful, beautiful process that was. I went out to my shop building. I carried, I don't know how much of my stuff out of there belonged to him. And I said, there's more. And here it is. And he was like, man, I forgot all about that. And that day I was able to clean up a wrong that had been done to that guy for more than 10 years at that time. Beautiful. If I would have done what this is about to say, he's going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than he is in my talk of spiritual discoveries. I could have sat him down and said, look, I went back through the process of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've had a new experience. You're the man I wronged. I could have done this. Loving God was with me now. I don't want to do that anymore. I mean, I could have talked shit until I fell out. But I showed him something that day. I handed him money and I said, I was wrong. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I done to you. And I'm sorry I threatened you. And you know what? He was more interested in that demonstration of goodwill than he ever could have been anything that I could have told him about God that day. The book says we don't use this as an excuse from shying away from the subject of God. And I did mention that. My life has been transformed. I didn't use the word God. It says the subject of God. It's a big difference there. When it will serve any good purpose, and sometimes it don't, but when it will, I'm willing to announce my convictions with tact and common sense, but that's only if necessary. I don't do that all the time. The question of how we approach the man, we look at this key word, hated. That's past tense. I don't hate those people anymore. I hated them when I wrote them down on that 4-step list. I hated their guts and would have beat half of them to death if I'd have got the chance and could have got away with it. But the book says hated, and ED means that's past tense, and that's a promise, man. What a promise. The man I hated, how to approach the man I hated will arise. It may be that he has done us more harm than we've done him. I've had some amends like that. And although we have acquired a better attitude toward him, now in steps 4 and 5, we done that. We acquired a better attitude toward this man or those men or those people or whoever it may be. It says we are still not too keen about admitting our faults. Remember back on page 67 of the book. And if you'll hold your place right there and you'll jump over there for just a second. Remember what it says about our faults. 3rd paragraph down, referring to our list again, putting out our minds the wrongs others have done. We resolutely look for our own mistake, where we've been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, though a situation had been entirely not our keyword fault. We try to disregard the other person entirely. We're not going to try to do that here. We're going to do that here in this work. So, nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take a bit in our teeth. And man, I had to do that in the fellowship. I promise you, the people that had exposed me for my behavior, I had to take a bit in the teeth with some of them. It's harder to go to an enemy than a friend, but we find it much more beneficial. What a promise. And once I can move past that fear, past that ego, past that self, and humble myself and go to that person and tell them that I was wrong for what I'd done and make amends to them, that's a beautiful outcome 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10. So look at what it says, and this is the direction. I go to him in a helpful and a forgiving spirit. If I can't do that, if that's not on my heart at the time, I don't need to be making that amends because I'm not ready to do that yet. But when I can go to him with a helpful and a forgiving spirit, confessing my former ill feeling and expressing my regret, then the outcome in my situation has been better than I could have ever imagined for sure. My sponsor said, David, I want you to take that one word, regret, at the end of that sentence. And I want you to build your amends around that. And I don't care how you do it. Lean into prayer and ask God to help you. I thought, man, I don't know how to do that. But when that little man came over that day, that was the first thing I said to him. I regret what happened in our relationship. And I regret the things that I did and I said to you. I regret the ways that I threatened you. I regret. And I continue to use that with every amends that come along with some of the women that I'd harmed through my conduct. I would tell them, I regret my behavior and I regret where I got to in my spiritual life, the way that it fell off and how self overtook me and I didn't even know it was happening. I regret the harm that I brought to you and I regret the harm that I brought to anyone that was connected to you that was affected by that behavior. I know that I was wrong and I need you to know that I know I was wrong. What can I do to make this right? At that point, I bounce the ball to them. I need to sit back, shut up, and get ready to take directions. As long as it's not illegal or immoral, I'm going to become willing to make that amends. I don't need to go talk about God and how sorry I am to the man I owe money. I need to go pay money. That's what I need to do. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So he says, under no condition do we criticize. That's kind of a never there. We never criticize such a person or argue. We simply tell him that we will never get over drinking, acting out, whatever it may be, until we've done our utmost to straighten out the past. And that's all we're here to do. Straighten up the past, clean it up, come into this sunlight of the Spirit, self out of the way. I mean, we are in a good place at this point if we've carefully followed directions up to here. We're there for one reason. That's to sweep off our side of the street, nothing more. Realizing that nothing, key word right there, nothing, and that's an internal. For me, that's internal. Nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Look at this direction, never trying to tell him what he should do. I could have told that man that day, if you hadn't sided with her, this and that, I promise you I would have never done that. If you would have just done some things different, no, I don't go there like that. I never try to tell him what he should do about his life. His faults are not discussed. I'm going to stick to my own. There were a lot of faults that I could have discussed with him on that day. But you know what? None of that even came up. It wasn't even in my consciousness that day. Look at this beautiful promise. If our manner is calm. See, in the early days when I'd make amends, my attitude was, if they don't accept my amends, they can all kiss my ass and then go down the road, and I don't care if I ever see them again. But see, I don't feel that way now. I've been humbled through this process in a new way. If my manner is calm and I'm frank, I'm looking the man in the eye when I'm speaking to him. I'm not holding my head down. I'm not looking over to the side anymore. Whenever I'm talking to my wife, I'm looking at her in her eyes. I'm not telling her a bunch of crap and looking away. That was one of the first things she told me during our amends. David, don't look away. Don't look away. Look in my eyes. And I'd done that with everybody that I'd ever been around, but I couldn't do it with her that day. So if I'm calm, I'm frank, and I'm open, look at this promise. We will be gratified with the results. It's not that we might be or hopefully we will be. No, by God, we will be, period. And that is a promise. So in 9 cases out of 10, and so that's more often than not, 9 cases out of 10, that's a pretty good number for me. The unexpected happens. There's a promise. Sometimes the man we're calling up on admits his own faults. I haven't had too many of those, but I've had a few. And so it's right. But right here's what happened with me and the uncle that day. This sentence. Feuds of years stand melting away in an hour. He was here about an hour and a half that day. And all of the feuds of the years of 15 years before were wiped away and erased that day. This is a beautiful process in the way that God leads us to get free of all that. Look at we're just hammering these promises out here in the 9th step. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Man, that's beautiful. Look at this promise. Our former enemies, look at that word former. They're no longer my enemies. They're former enemies now. I don't feel that way about them anymore like I did. I felt that way in the 4th and 5th step and the 6th step, but I'm not feeling that way anymore. I've asked God to remove those shortcomings, the ones that stand in the way of my usefulness to him and to my fellows in step 7. He met that. He met that request. And here I'm getting the rewards of it. My former enemies sometimes praise what we are doing and wish us well. Look at this promise. Occasionally, not always, once in a while, they will offer assistance. It shouldn't matter. However, someone does throw us out of his office. We have made our demonstration. We've done our part as water over the dam. I owed a huge amends. Many thousands of dollars, not just a few. 100, many thousands. Scared to death. I could never make this amends in all those years. I just knew they were going to send me back to jail for what I'd done. I'd taken advantage of a company that had put their trust in me, and they paid me big money. I mean, more than 6 figures. We're way more. But that wasn't enough for me. I'm a sober alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I deserved more, so I took it. And when I come up on this work, I knew that was going to come up because it always come up all the way through the years, but I just always pushed it back. I didn't want to go see these men. I just didn't. Well, remember what it said back on 76. There, second to the last paragraph, about the third sentence to the bottom of that paragraph says, if we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed in the beginning that we go to any lengths for victory over lust and whatever it may be. And so I started praying that prayer. God, give me the willingness. 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 Please give me the willingness. And the willingness came, and I didn't want to do it. But I did. And I got a hold of corporate, and I met with these men, and I said, look, this is what I've done. I took advantage. You gave me a card. I did this in such a way that you could never trace it back to me. In no way. Hell, I'm a convict. I know how to get things and you not be able to get back at me. And this is what I did. And not only was I wrong, I need you to know I was wrong. And I'm here to make arrangements however I can to pay that money back. And if you want to put me in jail, then I understand. And I'm willing. So they said, we'll get a hold of you. Well, for the next few days, you can imagine what ran on the inside of me. They're going to show up anytime. Hell, I couldn't sleep for looking outside all the time. A few days later, the phone rang, and they said, look, we're grateful that you came and did what you did. This happened a long time ago, and there's no way that we could ever trace this back. Even if we wanted to spend all the money to take you back to court and fight you against it, there's really no evidence because of the way that you hid it. And I said, I understand that, but I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever I need to do. Never apply with our company again, ever, throughout the years. Walk away, leave it alone, and we're good. You bet we're good. We are more than good. And so I'm happy, and I'm running around, and all this spiritual freedom and all this fears fell from me and all this self, And it dawned on me, boy, you hurt a lot of homeless women in your life. You took advantage of a lot of people. And I thought, oh, my God, where'd that thought come from? So I talked with my sponsor, and I said, look, I understand that I'm off the hook for this. It's like it says here, approached into what the most ruthless predator will sometimes surprise us. That's what happened. So I talked with him, and I prayed about it, and I came home, and I talked with my wife, and I said, look, I think that I need to give this money, one, to the homeless shelter for women, and the other to an abortion crisis clinic. And there's a whole story up behind all that. I said, I would like to split it up. This is a good number. I mean, a big number. But here's what's been laid on my heart. I don't think I need to take that from you and me to go pay that back. I done this. I need to pay it back. I will take bonuses. I'll work overtime. I'll do this. I'll do whatever I need to do to make this right. She was in complete agreement with that. That's my last amends that I have to make, and I've been making it for a long, long time now. And so that amends had me so held up. But when I broke free with that one, I had an experience from self like I'd never had in 2021. It was absolutely amazing, or 2020. And I've been on fire with this ever since. So it says this, approached in this way, the most ruthless predators will sometimes surprise us. Arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we are sorry. So I ran around forever in the fellowship saying nowhere in our directions does it say that we say we are sorry. BS. It says it right there pretty clearly. So our drinking, acting out, whatever it is made us slow to pay. We must. There's a must. Lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go. No matter. And I was willing to go to jail that day. I didn't want to go, but I was willing to go. And here's the reason why. Because I'm liable to drink if I'm afraid to face them. And that's a promise. Not all those promises up through there were pretty good, but there's one that's not so good. So if I'm afraid, I need to pray for the power to be honest and be consistent. And that's my prayer over and over and over. God, give me the power to be honest and consistent. Give me the power to be honest and consistent. So it says, perhaps we've committed a criminal offense, which will land us in jail. And one more thing on that last sentence right there in that paragraph before. It says to face them. It doesn't say to come up with something some other way. I'll just live differently now and all will be well. Now I owe a lot of money. I'm going to have to do something about it. Perhaps we've committed a criminal offense which might land us in jail if it were known to the authorities. I had that happen as well. We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. Now, we've already admitted this in confidence to another person. Remember in the fifth step, this should have all came out right there. And if it didn't, then we held back on something. So we should have already admitted this in confidence to someone else. But we're sure that we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. That's what held me back from making that amends for 25 years. And as a result of that, I could never get sexually sober. I could never. I just couldn't. And I don't know if that was the reason, or I'm sure it was many other reasons, but that was a big reason right there. Look what it said at that last sentence there in that paragraph we just read before this one. We're liable to drink, act out, whatever the case may be if we're afraid to face them. So we've already admitted this in confidence to another person. We're sure we'd be in prison or lose our job if it were known. Maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account, spending up the money, going to the casino, whenever my husband and them might need some, or your husband or my wife or whatever may need something, and I take that money and I do something with it that I think I have the right to do. I need to, that's the same thing as padding the expense account. You're only doing it at home. And so it says most of us, not all of us, but that word most of us have done this sort of thing. Maybe we're divorced and we've remarried, but we haven't kept up alimony to number one. She's indignant about it, has a warrant out for arrest. That's a common form of trouble too. So there's a prayer I use right through here. And this is it. God, please give me the strength and direction to do the right thing, regardless of the personal consequences. That's a hard prayer to pray. And if you pray that prayer, you better be ready, because if you're anything like me, it's going to show up and give you opportunity to do that. Although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding. The third step, the seventh step, the 11th step, the 10th step. All of these general principles will help to guide us. But reminding self that we have decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience, we should have done that in step one. Here's my direction, and here is my prayer. Anytime I see these two words in the big book, that's prayer. We ask that we be given the strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. Remember the prayer that I wrote at the top of my page. God, please give me the strength and direction to do the right thing, regardless of the personal consequences. That's a prayer. We may lose our position, our reputation. I've done all of that. I've lost my reputation in AA for so long over what I'd done, until one day my sponsor approached me as we was going through this work. He says, we're not here to build a reputation anyway, David. That's ego and self. Don't talk like that no more. Don't say that. Change my complete outlook on it. It's not about a reputation. Or face jail. And that's where I was at when I went back to that company. But we're willing, we have to, we must not shrink at anything. There's another promise. Usually, however, other people are involved. Man, that was a big one with my wife. A lot of the amends that I made to the women that I hurt, she was involved in that situation because we were both longtime members of our home group, Narcotics Anonymous. She sponsored a lot of those women, a lot. And when I did harm to them, I did harm to her, and I did harm to me, and I did harm to that group. A lot of other people were involved, like it said right there. I can remember getting reported to district and being so mad because they had done that to me. That didn't only involve the little group that we had. That started spreading bigger and bigger and bigger. So a lot of people are involved. They get hurt from what we do. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself. When I was doing these amends some years ago, I would almost get you to believe that it was your fault that happened, or you played a part in it. Maybe not your fault, but I can remember my wife's son had gotten really pretty bad on heroin. And of course, when we're bad on heroin, I know you're going to steal. You just do. For your habit, you do that. And so he had come in and he had stole a lot of money, and I got really aggressive and mean with him and was going to have him locked up and all this and that. And I don't know, my spirit spoke to me and I ended up letting him go. But I can remember she was just always terrified of my actions and how I was going to behave, because I'm just explosive. I just explode in a minute and without any notice. And so I can remember her mother was here that day. I was in the den and they were out there, and she just happened to look out and see my truck, only she didn't know I was in there. And she said, "Oh my God, there's David. Don't say anything. Don't say anything about our son and his name," she called it. She said, "Just keep all that quiet." And I can remember hollering up through there saying, "Yeah, you want to know how to keep a secret? I'll teach you how to keep secrets." And so I instilled a lot of fear in her. Well, later on, when I went back through the steps, I come up on the amends that I needed to make to her. And what I'd done was I used that against her. I said, "I need you to know that I was so sorry for what I'd done and all this stuff. But I heard you say that day that don't tell David." And that really hurt me. And that's why I started doing the things that I'd done. Could you understand that? I mean, I'm talking to her. And she's like, "Yeah, I could understand that. I'm very sorry." That's not how you make amends. I should have never said one word to her about what happened that day. It wasn't about any of that anyway. All I was trying to do was to cover up for me. Now, I'm sorry, and I'm a humble guy now, but remember, what you did really set this ball rolling. So, I mean, that's how sick we get in here. And we think that we've worked the steps. We think that we've been through the amends process. And now all of a sudden, we're speaking and we're talking, but we're slowly getting sicker and sicker and sicker in whatever addiction it is that we're in. It's easy to hide out in the fellowship and talk a lot of smack. It's a little harder to make an actual demonstration and step out here and say, "You know what, this is my fault. I'm the one who is wrong here. What can I do to make this right?" So the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. For me, it was the sexaholic pit at the time. This is a man we know had remarried because of resentment and drinking. Now look at how that is worded. The resentment always comes first, then the drinking. It's never the other way around. I don't drink and then have a bunch of resentments. The resentment's first, then the drinking. He had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. I remember this happening with my first wife. She went to the court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life. He'd come into the fellowship. He'd begin to work the process and have an experience here. Look at the great promises of him doing that. He secured a position. He was getting his head above water. It would have been impressive heroics. Look at those two words. My sponsor had me to write "avoid" above those two words. He's like, "I want you to avoid anything that has to do with trying to be an impressive heroic of anything, because that just builds your ego even more. And when that happens, it's not a good thing." But it says he would have been impressive heroics had he walked up to the judge and said, "Here I am." Now, we thought they ought to be willing to do that if necessary. But if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. There's a condition there. I need to be careful if I have an amends to make that's going to land me in jail. If I've got a family to take care of, if I've got children and family members who are sick that depend on me, I'm going to have to be very careful in how I make this amends. Now, a lot of people in the AA or SA, whatever it is, are going to tell you, no, you have to go make the amends. You have to. But if you're sitting in jail and your family is suffering over that because you're not there to provide a living for them or to take care of them some way, you haven't done anything but made it worse, because now you're going to owe them an amends when you ever get out of jail. So if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. Here was their suggestions. Now, they just suggested this. Didn't mean he had to do it, but he did it. So we suggested that he write his first wife, admitting his faults, the same way we did back on that work over on page 67 of the book. And look at this direction, asking forgiveness. For years, I run around saying, nowhere in this book does it say that we say we're sorry or that we ask for forgiveness. We've seen it twice now. On page 78, second to the last paragraph, arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we are sorry. And over here, we suggest that they write a letter admitting their faults and ask for forgiveness. It's here. We do both. He did, and he also sent a small amount of money, kind of like I did that day with the uncle. Told her he was what he would try to do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course, she did not, and the whole situation has been long since been adjusted. And what a promise. And I mean, it's never ending. I mean, as you read through these directions carefully, you will see it over and over and over. If I take these actions, chances are they're not going to lock me up. Chances are that they are going to give me another chance. I believe in a creator that gives many chances. If I didn't, most of us wouldn't be on here tonight. We'd be in jail, or we'd be dead, or we'd be homeless, or we'd be somewhere. But here's a direction at the top of page 80 that I better pay pretty close attention to. Before taking drastic action, meaning on any of these amends, I don't care how big or how small, which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. Now, if we have obtained permission from my wife or whoever that may be, consulted with others, such as a sponsor or a spiritual guide or whoever that may be, ask God, and look at the order that that's written in. First, we secure their consent. We consult with others, and then we ask God to take the drastic step. Why wouldn't it be the other way around? Why wouldn't we ask God first and this and this? Because now we intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. There's no reason why we can't do exactly what this is saying for us to do. We must not shrink if the drastic step is indicated. The step says we may direct amends to such people wherever possible, not whenever. If you tell me to make that amends whenever, I'm either never going to make it or I'm going to make it at the wrong time. Every time. That's the way I'm going to do it. This brings to mind a story about one of our friends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival. Giving him no receipt for it, he subsequently denied having received the money and used the incident as a basis for discrediting the man. My question here is, does this sound like me? In any area, does this sound like me? It did with the uncle. It did with several of the business partners that I've had through the years. I had always found a way to take advantage of those men, of their good hospitality. Even though they were paying me very well, it never was enough. It never will be with self. Look at what he says. He thus used his own wrongdoing as a means of destroying the reputation of another. In fact, his rival was ruined. He felt he had done a wrong that he could not possibly make right. Now, notice how he says he felt. That doesn't mean that's the way it was, but that's how he felt. Remember, the self is made up of ideas, concepts, feelings, beliefs, prejudice, and attitudes. So self is running this show right now. This is what he's saying. Self is telling this man, hey, you've done a wrong that you cannot possibly make right. If you open that old affair, it'll destroy the reputation of your partner, disgrace your family, and take away your means of livelihood. The book says, what right had he to involve those dependent upon him? How could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival? Let's read one more paragraph here, and then we'll close it down. But notice look at the directions. After he consulted his wife and partner, that's the first thing he did. Same thing it said at the top of the page. Before taking drastic action, we secure their consent. That's what he's done here. He came to the conclusion that it was better to take those risks than to stand before his creator guilty. Now, that was his conclusion. That's not a lot of ours, of such ruinous slander. He saw that he had, and here's the key to the whole thing, with any amends that I do, no matter how big, how small, I have to place the outcome in God's hands, or I'm just going to start drinking or acting out again. And all's going to be lost anyhow. So here's what he did. He attended church for the first time in many years. After the sermon, he quietly got up, made his explanation. His action met widespread approval, and today he's one of the most trusted citizens in the town. This happened all years ago, and that is a really good place to stop, because for a lot of us, this paragraph that's coming up at the end of page 80 here, into 81 and on, that's what a lot of us have struggled with inside of the fellowship after being sober for a long, long time. So we'll pick up on the domestic troubles next week and man, there's a lot of experience to share on that for sure. So I'm really grateful to be here to share experience, strength, and hope. I'm always grateful for Ashley and Dennis for their service to this meeting. I'm really grateful for my brothers and sisters from Bali and the Book It group that really was the one who kind of spurred this big book study. They gave us the idea for it many weeks ago, and here we are now. I've had a great experience coming through it. I don't know about anybody else, but I've had a great experience. So I'm really glad that you've helped me to stay sober one more day. Thank you.
This concludes David's share on tonight's chapter, but we encourage you to keep listening as he answers questions from the audience and shares additional experience, strength, and hope.
Hey, David, you started to explain the difference between whenever and wherever we make the amends, and you did share what whenever was. Can you share a little bit more about wherever, what that means to you?
Yeah, absolutely, Dennis. Good to see you, buddy, as always. And there's a big difference in those two words for me. I talked about whenever, like you said, but wherever is kind of wherever the spirit lays that on my heart. That person just kind of magically appears one day. Wow. And there he is. And I know in my heart I need to make this amends wherever has come true for me at that time. And, at that point, if fear is trying to hold me back or ego is telling me, no, it's not the right time, if I'm feeling fear in any way, I'm listening to the wrong voice. So that prayer that we looked at there on 76 in the beginning, if we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Or sometimes in those moments that I've started praying that prayer immediately. And for whatever reason, I've been able to step away from fear just long enough to say, hey, can I have just a couple of minutes of your time? And I'm committed then, wherever it's come true. So that's my experience with that.
Awesome. Jake.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Thanks, Dennis, for being a service. Thank you very much, David, again, for your lead and your experience and your insights. I really appreciate it. I heard something you said about, not realizing, obviously being an alcoholic and selfish and self-centered, not realizing the extent of how we hurt other people and how we affected other people's lives in every way. I actually grew up in Hong Kong, so I have amends to make in China. And I was recently back there a couple of weeks ago. And I used to, at a young age, get really drunk down in the city, spend all my money and jump in taxis and drive out, a fair ways out of the city, a good sum of money. And I would just park down the road from where I was meant to go and just jump out and run. And just sprint, jump into the jungle, whatever I do to get away from these taxi drivers who are often chasing me. And I was recently back there, and I've always, I always overtip taxis nowadays, but I was recently back and I was talking to a taxi driver, and he was telling me how many shifts he does and how many hours he works just to make ends meet. And I really had a profound, understanding of what you just said about how hardworking people, I was just ripping people off left, right, and center. And it was kind of a real good eye opener. So thank you very much for, bringing that to attention. And I still see that in some ways. But, this meeting is really, I find this to be a really, just heart opening experience and everything about it. So thank you again.
David, could you please, you say the self is making the feeling in self, and you gave the recipe, the self makes the feeling. I'm not really understanding it.
Yes, ma'am. Always good to see you here every week. Thank you for coming. The thoughts and the beliefs and the ideas and all of these things that I have that are not very heartwarming. In fact, they bring a lot of harm at times to other people and a lot of times to me. I find that with the self, when I talk about the self, I'm talking about a thought system based on past trauma, bad relationships, and all these feelings. Like when I killed that man all those years ago, the thought came in my head that day, he deserves it. Go ahead and do it to him. And so I did. And that's what I'm saying. That thought grew. It told me, well, nobody's ever going to do this to me again, and this and this. And it just caused me to be a lunatic for most of the rest of my life. So everything was based off of a thought that came to me that day. So for me, self, it's a thought system based on past events. And when I have a feeling or something along those lines, yeah, it's definitely connected to that for me. So I hope that helps you.
Yeah, thank you.
I understand about making direct amends. We should do this face-to-face. But can you share any experience or strength and hope about making like amends via phone call versus face-to-face, when we should do that?
Yeah, thank you, Ashley, for your question. My experience, and please, everybody on here, and I'm glad this is being recorded, please know that this is my experience. I do not claim to be the guru of AA or the big book or any of that. This is my experience and the way that it was given to me. But with that question there, if I owe Anuska an amends, I'm probably not going to be able to see her face to face for a long, long time. Probably not. In that case, I'm going to pick up the phone, and that will be as direct amends as I can make to her at the time. And, you know, I may never see her, but if I owe her an amends, then I need to try to make that right. To them all means to them all. So we're going to do them all, provided we don't harm anybody else in doing so. There are times whenever we have to make phone calls or whatever it may be. But it's my belief that if we have opportunity to go face to face to make the amends and we don't do that, we're hiding. And if we're hiding, it's because we're afraid. And if I'm afraid, it's because I've listened to the wrong voice. And for me, that's self. So thank you.